Okay, so as you might have seen, this session really is about finding practical ways to stop using plastic. So we know there's a big issue with plastic, and a lot of businesses want to stop using plastic. I think also customers want to stop using plastic, but a lot of times we're just not sure how to do it. So today we're going to actually get into that and discuss these different topics. So I'm going to briefly touch up on why recycling is not a viable
I think we're all having the issue, right?
Yeah.
I can see your faces.
Obviously, it has plastic as essential business material design. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, I'll try again. Okay, so I'll be talking about business models, material design. So these are going to be of the kind of more central themes that we'll talk about in replacing plastic. And a very interesting kind of point about deciding when a business or a product is actually viable to be on the market. And this we'll discuss towards the end of the session. And we'll see what your opinions are about that as well. So let's establish this first. During this session, of course, everyone's going to treat this differently, but because only 9% of plastic is actually getting recycled worldwide, obviously in different locations, these numbers could be different, but worldwide, it's around 9%. So I'm really not going to be treating recycling as a viable solution here. And also when we recycle plastic, what happens is that its value depreciates, and we know this. So anytime we're going to be recycling, we have to actually add in virgin plastic. So there's a problem there. And also there are issues with plastic, recycled plastic leaching more chemicals into whatever it's in contact with. So particularly with food and beverage, this is a concern. So the more plastic is recycled, the more toxicity we can find. And this is also definitely not something, we want. So for that reason, I would say, and not just me, there are places where plastic is simply not a good or viable option. These places would be around food and beverage, single-use product, packaging, because it's also kind of single-use. Clothing, on average, we wear a clothing item 7 times before discarding it, and that's not great. So plastic is definitely not a great option here. And basically anywhere it will not have a very clear recycling route and that will actually be carried out. So even if I say this product is recyclable, but I'm selling it in a place that doesn't have an established way of it being recycled, if I'm a producer and I know that whatever I put out into the market is not actually going to be recycled, or there's going to be an issue with that, then this is definitely also not a product where plastic belongs, right? So where does it belong? We can say, well, long-lived products, so products that will last a long period of time. And of course, where I know that this product, once the consumer is done with it, once the customer, there's a distinction there, once the customer is done using this product, I know that it will effectively be recycled, possibly as a producer, so with extended producer responsibility, for example. The producer is taking back this product and recycling it and putting it back on the market. So I need to make sure that this product is not going to end up in landfill. It's not going to end up in the ocean. So this is very, very much key for deciding where plastic does or does not belong. Do you guys have any comments here? I'd love to hear from you.
Not yet. Oh, well, I think agreeing.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep.
Very good.
I would say I don't know if I agree 100%. So I just recently joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation community. I don't know if you're part of that, and they have these really good training session. It's like a e-learning kind of thing that where you can and obviously that foundation talks about the circular economy, and the problem with plastic is that it's still, I don't know, what I disagree about in your slide is that you're still kind of talking about it as if it sort of has a single use to it, or like fewer, as long as it's recycled, then, you know, if we have the problem is that recycling is not a solution unless it's a metal or glass, something that can be recycled to exactly its original form. And plastic is not that, then recycling shouldn't really be looked at as an option for plastics. Plastic lasts 500 years or 1,000 years, so it should be applied to products that are supposed to last that long, not products that's supposed to last like 50 years even, or, you know, 10 years or 1 year. So, or, you know, 5 minutes, which is what it's been used for today. So basically,
Yeah.
that's kind of where, you know, I would be even more strict with this, you know.
Absolutely. So
slide.
Kathy, I definitely, I agree with it. I like
Okay,
it
it's like
more than
plastic
what I'm
lasts
saying.
500 years. As far as we know, we actually don't know that it lasts that long. We could last even 1,000
Absolutely.
years. It just hasn't been around long enough to be able to say, well, it will degrade in 500 years.
No, so
that would personally not be too, it's not too bad. 500, at least is something that you can, you know, but it could be like 10,000. You don't know. It's forever.
Absolutely.
So considering that it could be used as long as it's a recycling chain or whatever, I would just be like, no.
No, absolutely. So I agree with that 100%. I guess here I'm trying to be a bit more maybe a bit practical about it, but not too practical, because like I think what's going on now is that we're being a bit too practical about it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we can recycle this, we can recycle that. I'm going to be like, this is how strict I chose to be, but I definitely like how strict you're choosing to be. I agree with it 100%.
Yeah, I would just, on this slide, I would just put like, plastic lasts, you know, put a number, 500, 1,000 years. So it should only be used for products that are supposed to last that long. If you want to use it for products that are lasting less than that, then you have to use another material, something that is biodegradable, for example.
Absolutely.
Or another, something that is fully recyclable, like aluminum or glass.
Effectively, efficiently recycled. Absolutely. Great, great. All right, so so for those of you who live in the EU, for those of you who don't, I mean, I use the EU here as because I really like what they're doing in certain aspects, but just to kind of bring regulation into the conversation. So in different countries, you're going to see different regulation, but the EU directive is, however, for example, increasing mandatory rates of recycled plastic, which I have a slight problem with, but on the, you know, the good thing about it is that it's actually reducing and replacing plastic as well. It's actually encouraging and placing regulation in place for reducing and replacing plastic and other waste. So granted, for example, they're aiming to eliminate 15% of packaging waste. This is an example here. And I don't think this is good enough, but you know, they're starting to move in that direction, and we're seeing regulation in different places kind of, you know, come into effect and go in the same direction. So if we're going to be replacing plastic, how are we going to do it? What are we going to use? This is what we're really going to be talking about today. So I'm a big fan of biomaterials, of new materials that are being developed. There are hundreds of them. I'm particularly a big fan of materials that are made from food waste or agricultural byproducts, or whatever material that is currently being considered as waste. There are a lot of libraries that are coming up. Materium is one of my favorite ones. And what they're doing is facilitating this research and making these materials available. So if you guys have seen Materium before, you might know that you even have the recipes of making these new materials. So you even, not only do you see who the designer is, so that you can probably get in contact with them, or you know, like have this get into research or even prototyping and using this material, but you have the actual formula of it, how to make it. You can make it at home, which I think is great. And obviously, so we can prototype and bring these to the market. So obviously this is happening all over. There's a lot of investment going into this. I personally work a lot with, like, I'm working with this. I'm hoping to work more and more with it, but I have started working with this, how to prototype and bring to the market these new materials. And a thing that I would like to mention here is that I think SMEs, and it's not just me that thinks that, there's definitely information that backs that up, research that backs that up. I think SMEs are at a very big advantage when it comes to materials like this. Why? Because we have the ability to work on a small scale. So we have the ability to test things and also test them locally. So we don't have this kind of a very well established routes for mass producing products, right? So the advantage that we have is we can test and do things locally. And so anyways, literature backs this up and says, like, if you compare how small businesses, especially startups, new businesses are working within a circular economy, comparing that to established businesses, we're seeing faster changes, more circular business models being applied really in small businesses and startups versus well-established corporations that have been there for a long period of time that tend to have just more difficulty making these big scale changes, right? So this is something to talk about. I also want to talk about something before I ask your opinion on this. So the idea of compostable and biodegradable materials. So again, here, it's very important to recognize that if we're going to use compostable or biodegradable, we have to recognize that in the area we're selling this in, there has to be established
You stopped again, right?
routes for collection and for management. There's them, so I'll just throw them wherever. I saw also in the new EU regulation, there's going to be more strict laws on what can be labeled as biodegradable, especially for littering. So we can't just kind of throw away something that's biodegradable. How long will it actually last there, right? So under what conditions also will it biodegrade? So the risk also we run with just bringing in compostable materials into just any market is that it can pollute recycling streams, especially if it can be confused with plastic. Materials that will not biodegrade in landfills, and especially, of course, due to volume. So volume, when we talk about, if we all of a sudden started just with the same amount of materials that we use right now, just turn that into compostable materials, this would lead, and without proper management, this could lead to very big imbalances in our ecosystems. So having a lot of nutrition or nutritional materials in, for example, water systems, this would lead to these imbalances, which of course upset the natural flow of like the ecosystem and how it functions. So yeah, these are just things I also wanted to mention when we're starting to work with biomaterials and the idea of compostable and biodegradable. I'd love to hear you guys' comments on this. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think just companies should have a composting system on their site as much as possible. Even if it's a person living from home, they should have a composting, it could be a wormery that doesn't take a lot of space, or it could be a composting heap if there's a garden, or if there's an office space with any sort of, there should be just composting materials on site, and that would mean that all the biodegradable materials have to be home compostable rather than just biodegradable at home, rather than having to have a special facility to do it.
This is very interesting. I mean, how we're going to accomplish that. But I think the thing that I stress here the most is that if we're going to start working with these, we have to make sure that where we're selling them has, like, whoever is buying this material has a home composting, like has home composting, for example, or at least in their neighborhood where this is being sold, where they're going to be thrown out, there is a composting facility. Like, for example, where I live, several places I've lived had composting, where you can just kind of, the same bins that you would go and you would throw your recycling in, you have a composting bin, which was great. But most other places I've seen nothing of the sort, and it's not something that's available. I don't think it's going to be available anytime soon. And in urban settings, it is a bit difficult to compost at home. There are, of course, new products that are on the market which facilitate that, but it's not yet widespread. So definitely this is a big business opportunity. But yeah, I think we definitely need that to be established before we kind of can be selling this.
Well, I don't know where you're based. In the UK, generally, it's quite, I think it's quite well widespread to have a compostable bin outside of your house or your flat. So that's there, but I worry about that being contaminated with materials that are not actually compostable. And then if that compost is being used in farms, which is what they claim, that they send it off to farms, then it's actually, it will contain materials that are bad for the soil, and it will be contaminating the food that farm is producing, etc. So that's why I think, especially in the UK, because it's quite in countries like this where there isn't really that many cities that are, even in London where I live, in buildings with flats, you still tend to have some sort of outdoor space. It's not that restricted. Maybe in New York City it will be different because I don't know, the only green space
they're just starting to do composting systems in New York, just starting. I think I read this like last week. Yeah.
But
actually, sorry, I don't want to give wrong information. I think it was there, but it wasn't as like, now they're making it more available. So I think it must have been like there for a while. I don't want to give wrong information. I'll double check on this and maybe link the article that I read. Just sorry.
Yeah. And I think that we should just make people responsible for their waste more so than the councils and make it a personal responsibility than a communal responsibility, because that's how it all started, kind of. Anyway, I don't want to go into a tangent, but that's how this whole waste thing started. People had a little bit of ash that was 100 years ago, so that their waste was like a little bit of ash that was coming out of their fireplace, because anything that they wouldn't use they would just throw in there. And from that it just exploded with the massive packaging that we have and all the plastics. And then anyway, it's just a story of waste. Is crazy. So if we bring it back to each family is responsible for their own waste, and they have to figure out what to do with it, more so than the council, it will be, people will understand what happens to their waste.
I would agree and disagree. I think also we definitely like the businesses. It's also, I think, very much the business's responsibility.
And the business responsibility, so everything they produce has to be in a way that, but if the consumer, well, let's not call it a consumer, because that's another thing that I learned from MacArthur's training is, let's call people users, for example, because products should be reused and used rather than consumed once and that's it. So users, if their responsibility is to manage their waste, then they will not buy products that are not manageable in terms of waste.
Yes, here yes, definitely. And I also, there's going to be a talk on that very soon, like through the series of events that we're hosting. But I definitely will very much place responsibility on businesses as well. So if you're producing this, it's your responsibility as a business. So yeah, we can definitely talk about that a bit more later on. So let's continue with this and definitely get back into that discussion. And I think you're probably signed up to the same to that event, Kathy. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, so let's get into other alternatives. So like we said, with plastic, one of the biggest issues is, especially like when it comes in contact with food, beverages, clothes, like when it comes in contact with us, it's not the healthiest of products. So inert materials, so something that's not going to be interacting with well-established recycling systems. So glass and aluminum, those are great alternatives. However, aluminum is lined with plastic. Most of it is. So canned foods are usually lined with plastic, the cans, and glass. So glass is definitely something that is suitable for reuse and use again. Like it has to be used and used again. It can't just be a replacement as single use, because it does take a lot of energy to make, to it's heavy, so for transportation, it has higher emissions. So all of this kind of like treating it as a single-use item, a package is not ideal. Glass is definitely something to be reused. And of course, we can't all start using paper. So this kind of highlights the importance of developing new materials. So we can't all just start using paper. Yeah, we have to figure something new out, and that's where the biomaterials come in. Now, which I think is possibly the most effective, and not just me, statistically, that is also one of the most effective ways, it is changing our business models. So design will only get us to a certain extent, you know, but if we're going to keep on kind of with the whole single-use idea, if we're going to keep on, you know, going with the same amount of consumption, the same relationship that the customer has with the company, we're probably not going to make such big advancements. So a business model, your business model is how you deliver your product, your service, or the value that you're creating for your customer. So it includes everything from who your customer is, how you transport your product, what the product is, your income from it. So business model is really how you run your business. And relationships with the customer, I think, is very interesting here. How you build a new relationship with your customer through refills, for example, subscription, take back schemes. So these are very popular now, circular business models that would be very helpful with drastically reducing the amount of plastic that we use. Resource recovery. So as far as business models go, if you look at how much you can actually decrease greenhouse emissions. So resource recovery, for example, is one of the business models that can reduce it by as much as 90%. I can share the resources that I'm using here. So when you change your business model, really you're changing your relationship with the customer, you're changing what input you're using to make your product or service, what happens at the end of this product's life cycle. So you're really assessing all of that. And 80% of your product's impact is really decided at the design and development stage. So how much you invest in working on your business model, how much you invest in working on what materials you're going to use is definitely going to really improve and help you replace plastic. So anything about business models, because I think here it's not so much for the customer because they kind of still have the single use structure, but it's not really single use, it's reuse. So do you have anything you'd like to share or add here for circular business models? I don't know if you can hear me.
Okay.
Or,
The circular business model, which is again, we've worked a lot around this, how to make this reusable, reusable as a service. There are quite a lot of services out there, but scaling up those services across a city or multi-city is getting like really difficult. So one of the key, a missing piece is there. A missing piece in this whole supply chain of this reusable as a service that we always think is the infrastructure or the reverse logistics infrastructure. So when we started exploring this with like waste management company like Veolia, and we got the local waste management company Street Pride and stuff. So we are now exploring a different business model where they go and collect waste, but why don't they also collect reusables? So that because they already have an infrastructure in place.
Absolutely.
So it's just that you have to work on the business model and what are they going to get. But the infrastructure is already there. You don't have to rebuild a whole new infrastructure. So this is just one example of, how do you tap into the existing infrastructure to create a new business model for reusable as a service.
Excellent.
But there are so many out there. Yeah, but there's so many out there.
Absolutely. This is so great to hear. Yeah, very, very good. Okay, so we'll move on to something that I think is just, Yeah, I really like this idea. So recognizing what we can and we can't offer sustainably. So if we were placing circularity really at the heart of the business, would the product be viable? Okay, so we're going to go, sorry, we're going over like by just 5 minutes. This is the last slide. So if you guys want to stay afterwards and have a discussion, that would be great, of course. But I think we're going to be, go over the time just by 5 minutes with this slide. So I'm going to repeat. So if circularity were in fact at the heart of your business, would your product be viable? And I think about this as I'm going to compare it to profit. Is it really as valued as profit? So if you were to value circularity as much as you value profit, would your product still be on the market? So this is a question for any business that is either being established now or already established that is selling. So that means that if really I can't provide a product sustainably, I really cannot provide this product at all. So if we were to fill in the blanks here, so I'm just trying this out. So how would you fill in these blanks? I'd love your collaboration here. Just trying this out. So if a business is generating something, it's not viable.
Like profitable by generating waste.
Can you say that again? Sorry, I didn't hear it.
Profiting by generating waste.
Okay, so it's not viable. So if a business profits by generating waste, it's not viable. Excellent.
Like that's more of a moral thing than legal, but yeah.
Yeah, but so that's the thing. But the thing is, we don't have to wait for the kind of the regulations to come in and do this. As we're setting up new businesses, we can really follow this. And I think just by working at it really well and developing our business models and the materials that we choose, we can have very, very successful businesses. So yeah, sure, it's more right now, it's a choice, it's voluntary, but I think, if you provide the customer with something that they need at a feasible price and that's not polluting, I think they're going to choose you over a business that is. So
certainly that's our experience with our business, that and when lobbying government have been told that for example, coffee cups weren't banned with paper, with plastic straws, etc. And to quote Priti Patel, was because there's no viable alternative. So part of our business strategy is exactly that, showing people there is now an alternative and
Absolutely.
their thinking needs to change. I think it's the only way it works.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, the alternatives here, I figured with this sentence, and I was just trying it out. So I said, so if a business is, let me see if I remember how I did this. So if a business is not generating profit, it's not viable. So we know this, right? So if a business is generating waste, it's not viable. So these are the alternatives that I came up with as well. And yeah, so I just here wanted to consider some of the businesses that would not be viable. So mass productions of clothing, plastic prepackaged meals that are single-use convenience items, monocultures, which is not exactly related to plastic, but something definitely to mention. So monocultures that are depleting soils. So these are things that I definitely would say are not in any way viable, because if you really were to place circularity at the heart of the business and value it as much as you'd value profit, it really would not work. So yeah, this is my presentation for today. Just trying to get closer to figuring out how to actually, stop using plastic, what ways what ways we can go about it, and possibly kind of start this prototyping of new things, working on business models more to achieve, replacing plastic. Thank you so much for joining. I'll stop recording now and I'll stop sharing as well. So if you guys want to talk about anything else, we can do that.